Serena, who was one of the victims, she was underage. She was a young teen when her abuse was uploaded to Pornhub, downloaded, uploaded, millions of views, sending her on a spiral of trauma. She would beg Pornhub to get the videos down. She'd be hassled to prove that she was the victim, prove that she was underage, which is crazy because, they're not asking for that kind of proof to upload a video. But, she ended up dropping out of school, getting bullied. She got addicted to drugs to numb the pain. She tried to kill herself multiple times and then wound up homeless, living out of car. But Serena is suing the literal hell out of Pornhub, its owners, its executives, the hedge funds, and she's suing Visa.
The following program contains subject matter that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion advised.
How can I help? How can I be useful in ending needless suffering? Do not be afraid of work that has no end.
We have to organize a social movement.
We have an opportunity to lead by example versus just talking, hot air. I think the more people in this fight, the more we grow. Eventually it could change. The people are the ones that can make the change.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Firecracker Farm. We're going to get into a pretty heavy episode today, something that might upset some people, something that might be hard to confront, but to me, that just means it's incredibly important. My guest today is Laila Mickelwait, and she is the woman behind the movement Trafficking Hub, which is a global effort to take down Pornhub. She is the founder and CEO of the Justice Defense Fund and the leader of the global, like I said, Trafficking Hub movement. That is a hashtag that you can follow on social media. That particular movement is a decentralized global effort to hold Pornhub accountable for enabling and profiting from child abuse, sex trafficking, rape, and the criminal exploitation of countless victims. This movement has garnered significant attention, with this petition being signed by over 2.3 million people from every country in the world. And we'll talk about how you can join that petition if you want to in the end. Let's dive into the episode. So it's an interesting, I guess, entryway to this. I know we're going to talk a lot about Pornhub, but this had hit trafficking, sex trafficking, and hit your radar before that. I'm curious, when did you first become aware of this? When did you decide, like, you know what, this is it for me, I'm going in?
Yeah, well, it was kind of a organic situation that wasn't really planned. So I had been investigating the intersection between the porn industry and sex trafficking for a number of years before the fight to hold Pornhub accountable began in 2020. I had understood that we were living in a digital age and that these crimes were being filmed and then they were being distributed online. And so I was paying attention, and I noticed some really disturbing headlines at the end of 2019 about victims who had ended up on Pornhub. Probably the one that was, most haunting to me was the story of a 15-year-old girl from Broward County, Florida, who had been missing for a year. And she was finally found when her distraught mother was tipped off by a Pornhub user that he recognized her daughter on the site. And she was found in 58 videos being abused on Pornhub.
Is this Serena?
No, this is not Serena.
Okay.
This is an unnamed. We don't know the name of this particular girl, but she was rescued from the apartment where she was being abused. She was impregnated, actually. Anyway, it was a horror story of a situation. It was making some headlines in late 2019. At the same time, the London Sunday Times had done an investigation that they had released, and they had found dozens of illegal videos on Pornhub, even children as young as 3. And so I was just, obviously, this is my world. I'm focused on trafficking. These stories caught my attention. And I was really haunted with a question of how in the world did these abuse videos end up on Pornhub? Because everybody had this idea of Pornhub as this mainstream brand. It was being talked about on Saturday Night Live. They have pop-up shops at New York Fashion Week. People are wearing their sweatshirts. And, they were like this kind of just global brand that was kind of accepted in mainstream, even kind of celebrated. Actually, you could hear people on late night making jokes. And And so, everybody was under this assumption that this was a legitimate corporation that was distributing legal content and that these videos were vetted. But my dad is a wise man, and he often said assumption is the mother of all screw-ups. And that resonated. And I was up one night, late one night, it was January 31st, 2020. And I was thinking about that story of that 15-year-old girl, and a question, came to mind. How in the world did it end up? I want to test the upload system. Let me just test this system for myself and just see actually how they're vetting these videos. Because at the time, they were a huge website. I mean, I don't think people really understand the magnitude of Pornhub. So after they had capitalized on coronavirus, they had actually gotten to a point where they had 170 million visits per day, 62 billion visits per year. They had 169 years worth of content being uploaded every year.
I was just looking for that stat as you were describing it.
Yeah.
It is shocking.
Yeah, the magnitude of the company, how big the site was. They had 56 million pieces of content on the site. So I tested the upload system, and I found out what millions of people already knew. And that was that all they were requiring was an email address. Anonymously with a VPN, anyone in the world could film on an iPhone and upload a sex act to Pornhub, and they were not checking ID to make sure they're not children. They were not checking consent to make sure these are not rape victims. And I quickly started to connect the dots and understood that the site was actually infested with videos of crime, like real crime. And so that's how it all started. So when I say it was organic, it really was. It wasn't like I was out thinking, okay, we're going to execute this campaign. I was paying attention. I was in the trenches of the fight. An important question came to mind, and it was like this moment when everything, it was, I kind of like love this phrase, an idea whose time has come. It was like trafficking hub movement to hold Pornhub accountable was an idea whose time had finally come, because they had been doing this since 2007. And so this was a long way from that moment.
When you tested that upload, and for people who are audio only, I'm using air quotes for vetting process. What was Pornhub's stance? What did they tell people as a company? What were they saying about the safety measures that they had in place?
Well, they were saying that what they would do in their defense is they had this statement, this kind of canned response that they're so concerned about, child abuse and whatnot, but that these videos are legal and consensual material that are made to cater to user fantasies. And when you see a term like teen, and when you see a term like hidden camera, that this is all just, fantasy, where this is people who are over 18, who are consenting adults who are engaging in these, scenarios to cater, quote unquote, cater to user fantasies. Like that was their position. So they're like, if you see teens on the site, and that at the time, in around that time, teen was one of the most popular categories on Pornhub. They even had a popular category in tags like very, very young, old, young, the small tits, like that was another one that they had, things like that, which would indicate that this is a young person, clearly. But they were even tracking down to the dollar, how much money they were making on those categories monthly. But that was their position, was like, look, this is all legal and consensual content. But that couldn't have been further from the truth, because they actually had no idea.
I was going to say, how can they speak for the people
legal.
uploading the video? They have no idea for the participants inside of that. Plus, that statement, how does that align with what you said earlier, that there was a 3-year-old associated with it? I mean,
of course, like it doesn't at all. And even the processes that they had in place were just so that they could say they had a process. For example, they had 1,800 employees working at Pornhub. Now, also, I want to say Pornhub is owned by a parent company that most people never heard of. And that company was named MindGeek. And MindGeek, with a $362 million loan from Chld Capital and 125 secret investors who were later outed as including JP Morgan Chase and Cornell University, They rolled up the porn industry under one huge international conglomerate called MindGeek. And Pornhub was the flagship site, it's the cash cow. It's the most popular of all their sites, but they owned managed sites and subscription sites. Like they were managing Playboy, and they had browsers and Wicked Pictures and Reality Kings and YouPorn and RedTube and Tube8 and XTube and GayTube. And, I mean, I could go on and on and on about how large this corporation was. But shoot, where was I going with that?
How they claim that they had the filtering and this is consensual.
Yes.
But
so they had 1,800 employees working for this huge international conglomerate, and they had hired one person, 5 days a week to be reviewing videos flagged by users as terms of service violations, including and trafficking. So why would you as a company hire one person 5 days a week? They had a backlog of 706,000 flagged videos, and they had set up a system where a video had to be flagged 15 times before it was even put in line for review. So we have evidence now turned up in legal discovery in these child sex trafficking cases against Pornhub, where there's a video of a prepubescent child. So talk about 3-year-olds, right? Clearly prepubescent child, categorized that way, and it had 13 flags, or another one that had 14 flags, and they were on the site for years. So this was the way that they operated. So they wanted to present this facade, like they would say, we have a large and extensive team of human moderators that are viewing every piece of content before it goes up on the site. Like that was one of their statements to defend themselves when all of this was coming out. Well, we discovered, because moderators came forward as whistleblowers and provided the schedules and provided the names of who was doing this in Cyprus. They had 30 moderators for all of MindGeek's PornTube sites, including Pornhub. They were working 10 per shift. They were watching between 800 and 2,000 videos per 8-hour shift, just clicking through the videos with the sound off. That's how that worked. So all of it was just, obviously, right, like lies. They were just trying to defend themselves with these meaningless statements that weren't grounded in reality.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard me talk about Firecracker Farm and their hot salt. You probably heard other people talk about it as well. If you haven't tried it yet, let me just tell you, you're missing out on some serious flavor. Their hot salt is delicious, and it really makes pretty much anything that you put it on even more delicious. It's hot, but when you use it in moderation, it's not too hot, and the flavor that it adds enhances without overpowering. It is handmade, super premium, and comes in awesome stainless steel push-button grinders like the one I have in my hand right here. You can take them anywhere. Hot sauce, if you've had this experience, can very easily overpower other flavors and always runs out quickly when it's good. Hot salt lasts and lasts. The push grinder holds over 500 plus pumps, and when you consider the refill it comes with, it's thousands of servings, and it's a great deal and a lot cheaper than the sauce. For those of you that like flavor but hesitate because it might be too hot, you can mix it with sea salt to tone it down and still enjoy the awesome flavor. In my personal experience, you can modulate how much comes out of the dispenser. You're in total control of the amount of heat you serve yourself. So if you would like to support our show and give Alex and his family business a shot, head over to firecracker.farm and use the code Ironclad to get a 15% discount on your first order. You will be very glad that you did. Firecracker.farm.
On the new season of Borderland, Narcosis, we'll take an even closer look at the institutions, criminal forces, drugs, and operations that are driving mass migration from regions torn apart by violence and corruption. We're pulling back the curtain on the ruthless forces that drive mass migration. Organized crime.
I don't even have the vocabulary to describe what I think about what you just laid out there. Before we get into more how your desire to tackle this and to go after Pornhub. You mentioned something earlier about how Pornhub, it kind of just exploded into like the modern vernacular of the day, right? Like if it's showing up on Saturday Night Live, Fashion Week, can you kind of walk me through how the company was created and how did it get to that place where it was just, oh yeah, it's Pornhub, you know, like whatever, consenting adults, go take a look at it, you know, if you want to, and if not, and not. But it's weird that it would get into that social lexicon at that level.
Well, they had a very intentional goal to do that, to make Pornhub the world's brand name for porn. And there was a man named Fabian Tillman who was known in the media as the Zuckerberg of porn. He was the one that got that $362 million loan to roll up the porn industry. And, you know, from many, many years ago, he was a German entrepreneur who had this vision for, you know, global free porn and an ecosystem where they could have free porn sites that get massive amounts of traffic and they can harvest user data, monetize that data, but also have this enormous advertising arm. So on Pornhub, they were selling 4.6 billion ad impressions every day. And so then they could advertise their paid sites, and it's like this kind of complementary ecosystem. But, you know, he was the one that really put Pornhub on the map. So Pornhub was purchased for $2,000 at a Playboy Mansion party. The URL in, I think it was like 2006 by a guy named Matt Keyser. And he was the one that owned the earliest version of MyGeek, which the owner of Pornhub. So it went from ManSef to ManWin when Fabian, the Zuckerberg of porn, took over. Now, when it was ManSef, they kind of exploded the company a bit, like they grew a lot. But then they got in trouble because the Organized Crime Task Force seized multiple millions of dollars from them. I think it was like $6 million from them because they, you know, for the issue of money laundering. So they were in legal trouble. So then they had to sell the company. They sold to Fabian. Fabian got in legal trouble for tax evasion. He was arrested on tax evasion in Belgium. Then he had to sell the company. So he sold it again. And when he sold it to somebody who hid their identity from the public. Nobody knew who the majority shareholder of Pornhub was for, you know, since 2013 until he was finally unmasked in the very end of 2020 and 2021. So they finally, and that was due in part to Fabian actually coming forward to me in the midst of the viral Trafficking Hub campaign to hold Pornhub accountable. And Fabian reached out to me and he said he wanted to help hold the company he used to own accountable.
Interesting.
And he actually revealed the name of the secret shareholder, who's Bernd Mayer. And he also said, listen, if you really want to go after Pornhub, go after the credit card companies, because that's the Achilles heel. This is the only thing they care about. This is all about money, which this is all about money. And trafficking at the end of the day is all about money. It is a transactional crime. It is for money. So yeah, so that happened. And then so Pornhub was kind of put on the map. Now they did like immense PR campaigns. So they would do crazy stunts. Like they had this whole arm of Pornhub called Pornhub Cares. And it was like the philanthropic arm, right? I know, right? And they would do like Save the Boobs, where they would have like a campaign where, you know, they're going to donate for breast cancer research and save the whales and save the oceans and all these kinds of things. They were donating masks for first responders during coronavirus. And then they would just throw millions of dollars behind PR for all of this stuff that they would do. And they just got so much media that they became, you know, who we know is like the household name for porn in the world, Pornhub.
Where were they? So when they created the business, correct me if I'm wrong, it was based in Canada, right? Where was the structure in the infrastructure of this business laid out?
Well, they were incorporated in Luxembourg for tax purposes, and they had their headquarters in Montreal, where that's where most of the employees worked.
Okay.
They had some moderators in Cyprus. They had people in Romania, in the UK. They had offices in the US. They were kind of spread out everywhere. So it was a very complicated corporate structure that they had. They had, you know, dozens and dozens of subsidiary organizations as well. You know, some of these are just bank accounts and PO boxes and set up that way.
All right. So you have an idea whose time has come. Trafficking Hub. Where did you start? I mean,
I started on Twitter.
I mean, it's a behemoth though, right? You're looking at it's the classic David versus Goliath, probably billion-dollar income stream for that company at this point, and you have an idea like, you know what? Today is the day. What do you do?
I just couldn't even resist. Like, I was so horrified to understand. And at the time, like I went down the what I call like the hellhole of rape on Pornhub, where my eyes were opened, and I saw the most horrific videos that you could ever imagine, and girls who are just so completely clearly drunk, crawling on the floor, women who are unconscious, who are being raped, who are so unconscious. It's not pretend, it's like the mass rapist is lifting their eyelids and touching their eyeballs to show that they are completely unresponsive. Blatant, all this stuff on the site. And I'm just compelled to just say, like, I have to tell people what's going on. So I just did what I could at the time. And that was took to Twitter, which was, it was, X, right? But it's Twitter at the time, and just said, like, this is what's going on. I started a hashtag called Trafficking Hub that started to catch on. I wrote an opinion piece that was published in the Washington Examiner, and it was laying out the case, connecting it to the media stories. And it was called "It's Time to Shut Pornhub Down." And then that became a petition, and the petition went viral. And today we have 2.3 million people who've signed it. People are still signing it every day from every country in the world. We have signatures. And as this was happening, victims were seeing this and they were reaching out. At one point, it was like almost daily that I was getting connected to a victim who said, I have my video on Pornhub. I was abused as a child on Pornhub. And whistleblowers, like I said, coming forward, and it began to just build and build. And as the petition started to grow, it became newsworthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, people were like, what? Pornhub has this problem? Like, it's infested with rape videos. And so hundreds of media articles started to be written about it. And it culminated in a New York Times piece that was a huge moment for all of this, when Nick Kristof of the New York Times, he did a 6-month investigation, and he was talking to many of the victims that were coming forward, and he released the children of Pornhub, and he ended the article with the words, "With Pornhub, we have Jeffrey Epstein times 1,000."
Damn.
Yeah, and it sent shockwaves around the world. The parliament in Canada was up in arms. They were demanding a criminal investigation. Justin Trudeau was making a statement on TV. The credit cards felt the pressure because we had taken Fabian's advice and we were going after the credit cards to try to get them to cut Pornhub off.
And so can you unpack the importance of that role? Because people may not understand, Pornhub as a conceptual idea. If you're trying to make money, you have to have a payment processing mechanism. So I want to underscore and highlight the role that those credit card companies actually played.
Yes. So, you always hear the phrase, follow the money.
Yep.
And I mean, in this case, it couldn't be more true. They can handle bad press, but they can't handle getting cut off by the credit card companies. Like, I mean, they'll figure out a way. They have figured out a way to survive, right? But it was the worst nightmare for them to think that they would lose the credit card companies, because when you're an online business, like, there's really not a very profitable online business if you cannot process credit card transactions, because not enough people today use crypto. Like, crypto is just not very widespread as far as people using it. And so the idea that the credit card companies would cut them off would be something that they would consider debilitating. And, that is something, we understood, but then again, confirmed by the former owner, who says the only thing they care about is the credit card companies. And so that's why we felt like it was so important. But also, when you think about trafficking, and especially like corporate facilitated trafficking, when we think about this, it's not just that you have to hold a company accountable, because, traffickers have enablers, right? Like corporations that are engaged in this kind of activity, they don't just do that on their own, right? They have enablers, and those enablers allow them to exist and flourish in our world. So for Pornhub, that would be like the search engines, right, that are helping drive traffic to the site. It would be the hosting companies. It would be the financial institutions, the hedge funds that are funding them. It would be the credit card companies that are processing all their payments. And so we understood that we have to look at this, we kind of zoom back, and it's not just the company, it's the ecosystem of that company and who's enabling them. And target number one was the credit card companies. It's also advertisers, right? So we had to go after the advertisers as well. And today they've lost all mainstream advertisers. Like KY Jelly, Weed Maps, and Astroglide will not advertise on Pornhub anymore. That's how much of a pariah they have become. And but that's why we went after the card companies. And thankfully, after resistance and resistance and resistance, finally, with this New York Times piece, they actually made the decision to cut off Pornhub. And that was actually thanks to also the pressure of Bill Ackman. So Bill Ackman's a billionaire, activist investor, hedge fund manager who just had a passion for this issue when he read it. He has daughters of his own. He happened to know the CEO of MasterCard, so he got involved.
It helps when you can, maybe dial somebody in your personal Rolodex.
Yeah, that was definitely, that was like a moment where I was going, is this real? Like, how is this happening, but it was, and they cut off Pornhub. Visa, MasterCard, and Discover joined PayPal in cutting off Pornhub at the end of December 2020.
They all did it at the same time?
So PayPal had done it at the beginning of the year.
Yep.
And they followed suit then at the end. And so back to why they were so important and how much power they have over these companies like Pornhub. Because that happened, its executives were in such a panic that they decided to do the unthinkable. And they decided that the only thing they could do to try to woo them back was to delete the content, all the unverified content. So they took down over 10 million videos and over 30 million images in 24 hours.
Oh, really? So that was easy for them to find it. So shocking.
Boom.
Wow.
Just like that.
Huh.
Gone. It was just
what a crock of shit.
In a moment.
We have all these people and we verify this stuff, and then in 24 hours we're going to identify all this content and delete it. What a sack of shit.
Yeah, well, I mean, you talk about an admission, right?
Yeah.
Talk about an admission that your site is infested with videos of real sexual crime when you have to. And the reason why I say it's the worst thing that they could have done is because the business model of free user-generated porn depends on massive amounts of content. Like, content is king. Like, that's what the insiders said. They said content is king. They have to have inventory because they have to have URLs. They have to have that picked up in Google to drive traffic to the site. And if they don't have that, they don't have traffic and they can't sell ads, which is how they make most of their money.
Yeah.
So it really was the worst thing that they can do. And there you go, instantly. Now, however, 2 weeks later, I found this out probably 9 months later, that 2 weeks after all of that went down at the end of 2020, the credit card companies quietly snuck back to Pornhub's advertising arm.
Why does it always have to be about money? Yeah, it's just they're making a small scrape on the transaction. Why does it always have to be about money?
Well, they were making probably a little bit more than that because when it was a high-risk transaction, so these are all high-risk transactions, so they can charge more
for their
than
processing
a normal transaction. Yes, so they were making, significantly more per transaction on these than they were on just say, products on Amazon.
None of that is accidental. There's not a single portion of that. I mean, especially if I know nothing about the internal workings of a credit card company, so I'll use Visa as one I'm familiar with. I feel like that there is somebody in Visa that uses Microsoft Excel and keeps track of revenue funds and, or streams like, hey, this one's really high. And also, by the way, we're charging more per transaction on this one. And look at how much we're making. I feel like it is impossible for that to have existed without it being known. And probably the politest way to say it would be ignored by those in power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, it was. But when it was even brought to their attention, they resisted, right? They resisted doing, and when we think about the law, so it's not just that it's like the morally correct thing to do, not to monetize child abuse and trafficking. It's actually illegal to knowingly benefit from a sex trafficking venture
As it
in
should
the
be.
United States.
Yeah, as it should be. It
Yes,
should be
so
globally.
right. Well, at least in the US, our
Yeah.
law is that you cannot knowingly benefit from a trafficking venture. And so I don't think, many people kind of connect these dots. But so the reason why I started the hashtag trafficking hub is because according to international and domestic definition of trafficking, any monetized or commercialized, I would say commercialized instance of a sex act of a child, so a child that's involved in a sex act that's commercialized, or if it's induced by force, fraud, or coercion of an adult and it's commercialized, that's the key here, right? It's like becomes trafficking when there's an exchange of something of value. And because every single video on Pornhub is highly monetized, free porn is not free. It is highly monetized in so many different ways, primarily by selling ads on the videos. But they become instances of trafficking. So all the trafficking statutes apply to what was going on. And with Visa, it was, listen, you need to stop this, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because if you don't, you're going to be in big trouble, actually legally, which they are. So Serena, who was one of the victims, she was underage. She was a young teen when her abuse was uploaded to Pornhub, downloaded, uploaded, millions of views, sending her on a spiral of trauma. She would beg Pornhub to get the videos down. She'd be hassled to prove that she was a victim, prove that she was underage, which is crazy because, they're not asking for that kind of proof to upload a video. But, she ended up dropping out of school, getting bullied. She got addicted to drugs to numb the pain. She tried to kill herself multiple times and then wound up homeless, living out of a car. But Serena is suing the literal hell out of Pornhub, its owners, its executives, the hedge funds, and she's suing Visa.
Currently.
And Visa, yes.
Awesome.
And Visa lost its motion to dismiss the case.
Yes.
So this. So they went back, right? They snuck back. Now, fast forward to August of 2022. And in this meantime, I'm desperately trying to get them to stop. I'm going back and just saying, listen, how could you go back? Here's more proof. Here's more evidence, getting Bill Ackman involved again, on and on. They're resisting again. Finally, August 2022, they lose their motion to dismiss the case in a scathing decision by Judge Cormac Carney in California on Serena's case. And he said, of many other things, he said, Visa gave Pornhub the very tool through which to complete the crime of knowingly benefiting from child trafficking. So that was the words of the judge. And Bill, just jumped right in that moment. And he got us on CNBC Squawk Box. He got Serena's attorney on CNBC Squawk Box the day before. And we just called out the CEO, Al Kelly. And, I just remember just looking in that interview, it was like on Zoom, and I looked in and I imagined I was looking in his eyes and I just said, and Al Kelly needs to stop. Like how could you be doing this? Bill had a powerful, words about how wrong and illegal all of this was. And so then finally, more headlines. And then Al Kelly does something kind of unprecedented. He makes a personal statement saying finally Visa is going to withdraw its services from Pornhub. And they've continued to have to take down content. So today, Pornhub has been forced to take down 91% of the entire website.
Whoa.
And they have went from 56 million pieces of content to 5.2 million pieces of content.
That's still
today.
A tremendous amount.
Yeah, but we're not done.
Yeah.
But still, that's where we're at. So they have, faced a reckoning. CEO and COO were forced to resign. And they've been criminally charged by the Eastern District of New York. They were criminally charged for knowingly profiting from sex trafficking of a particular subset of victims, like 100 victims in California who are victims of trafficking. But so that's kind of where we're at now.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to get into elite shape, or perhaps just make improvements to your current level of fitness, check out the Mountain Tough digital training program. You can try it for free for 14 days, and you can see the results for yourself. The app allows users to train wherever they are with minimal equipment requirements, whether you're in the gym or you're outdoors or you're at home. Users can access top-tier programming that fits into their lifestyle. The Mountain Tough app offers expertly designed progressive training plans that guide users from start to finish. These plans are tailored to build resilience, strength, and endurance over time, preventing burnout and injury. The app features self-guided and follow-along coaching videos, allowing users to be coached through every workout step by step. This helps to ensure proper form, motivation, and intensity, regardless of the user's fitness level. The Mountain Tough app delivers training programs built for the unique physical demands of mountain athletes, including hunters, tactical professionals, and outdoor adventurers. The programs themselves are designed by seasoned strength and conditioning experts, elite athletes, and military veterans. Start your 14-day free trial today and check out the results for yourself. And be sure to use the offer code CHANGEAGENTS, and I'm looking at it as one word, at signup, and you can get 40% off your annual subscription. Remember, use the offer code CHANGEAGENTS at checkout. So I was going to ask you about Serena. I'm glad that you brought her up because I was curious about, you said that quite a few victims had also reached out to you. Is her experience with trying to work with Pornhub and submitting a complaint and trying to get her content down and being, this arduous process or antagonistic process of prove us your age and prove that it is what it is in real, is that a common experience from these victims? An unwillingness for Pornhub to actually take action, even when the victim itself is like, this is me, this is what happened, this is illegal.
And even when police were reaching out. So it wasn't just when victims themselves were reaching out. So I'll give you two examples. So there's a girl named Nicole from the UK, and she was a child victim. She was preyed on by a notorious pedophile named Abdul Alahi, who's in prison, I think, for 36 years for abusing thousands of victims, and she was one of them. And it was an instance of blackmail and sextortion and just this horrific situation. And I saw the emails that she would send over and over to Pornhub, begging them, why are you allowing this to continue to get uploaded? And this was actually written about in the New Yorker. They did a piece and they talk about these emails and that they saw as well, that, where she was having this constant battle to try to get them to take them down. And then if they did, they would just get re-uploaded again. So it was like, for victims, I call it a sadistic game of whack-a-mole, where they're just living in this perpetual torment of trying to, monitor the internet to see, like, when is this going to pop up, and then try to get it down. And then if they do, it just goes up again. And it's, for them, they call this the immortalization of their trauma, because, it's one thing to be raped or abused, but then it's filmed and then it's uploaded, not just for profit, for pleasure. So people are actually, getting pleasure out of watching this. And then it's like a scab that could just never heal. It's a wound that can never heal because the scab is just constantly ripped off again and again as the videos of the trauma get uploaded again and again. And another situation was a 12-year-old boy in Alabama who was drugged and overpowered and raped by a man named Rocky Shea Franklin. And Franklin filmed the abuse, and he uploaded 23 of those videos with titles that were clearly indicating abuse. So, very, young Uncle C, like I'm not going to say all the descriptions, but they indicated that this was child abuse in those titles. And then he was arrested. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison. So he's doing 40 years for what he did. And police reached out to Pornhub multiple times, demanding those videos come down, and they were ignored for 7 months. And those videos stayed online, getting hundreds of thousands of views, of advertising impressions, of all of that getting downloaded, because they had a download button where you could actually possess. So it's not like YouTube where it's just you could watch it later, where they were transferring these videos from their servers onto the devices of millions of people around the world so they can then re-upload them again and again. But yeah, so those are instances of where there was this just resistance to even complying with the demands of the police who are reaching out. And thankfully that boy is suing Pornhub too. So he is holding them accountable. He's using RICO. So Serena's also using RICO to go after them, and pornography laws, sex trafficking statutes to try to hold them accountable. In fact, we have nearly 300 victims right now in 25 lawsuits since 2020, including multiple class actions on behalf of tens of thousands of child victims.
How is Pornhub responding to those? I mean, because you see organizations, they'll shut something down and open up something else. So they'll deal bankruptcy and then reopen, and they'll reform another company. So what's Pornhub up to? Because that's, I mean, they're on the receiving end of a firing line.
Yeah, so they were sold as a distressed asset. So the company ended up being sold to a hastily concocted private equity firm. And the litigation, the attorneys call this, they call it a pop-up private equity firm that they don't think had any equity. But they named themselves Ethical Capital Partners. And they are trying to do this like whole rebrand of Pornhub where they're trying to, you know, it's like the corporate whitewash. They're like, this is an opportunity to try to get something that is almost dead. And if we could resurrect it and try to rebrand it in the mind of society, then we can make a killing. And so that's what they're trying to do right now, but they're battling and they're losing in these lawsuits. So in December
Of 24?
they filed, yes,
Sweet.
just in December. So Alabama class action on behalf of tens of thousands of child victims. And they filed their motion for summary judgment. So, you know, they are just trying to make discovery process as hard as possible for victims and their attorneys, of course. Like, you know, it's just like delay, try to, you know, slow it down as much as possible. But the attorneys and these survivors are so incredible and so tenacious and just unwilling to relent. And so they have come up with so much damning evidence in the discovery process that, so with the summary judgment, it's after a discovery process, and then they say, listen, we are going to say that you didn't find enough evidence for this to go to trial. They asked the judge to kind of just dismiss the case at that point. But the judge, in another scathing decision where he's actually uncovering facts about Pornhub we never knew before, and he denied that summary judgment. So that is going to trial. And imagine a trial where you have these stories with these facts. I mean, I could imagine a jury just saying, we're going to hand down, you know, the worst possible.
I can't imagine them letting it go to trial. I would imagine.
I mean, it would be bad for them.
I can imagine them trying to legally maneuver and taking it right to that precipice. But if you put this in front of a jury box of 12 reasonable people, you better stand by.
Yeah, I know. I think that, you know, they'll probably want to try to, they probably want to see if they could get off the hook at any point in this process. Now, in that case, they can't. Like, they're going to trial. The judge said,
unless they settle.
Nope, unless you settle. So they're probably, I mean, they don't want this to go in front of a jury, right? So they're going to try.
Well, especially if they lose one somewhere else and there are multiple other cases. I feel like that there would then start to be a precedent. And then, it's I can't fathom them actually going to court. My estimation, completely uneducated guess would be they will push the legal system as far as they can until they know that they're facing the firing line, and then they'll come out with a settlement. Because there's no way that this is going to go in their favor in front of a jury.
Oh, there's just no way. I mean, there's the facts that it's like, you know, you almost call it like an untriable case where it's just the facts are so horrendous that there was a revenge porn case, and it's not really called revenge porn anymore. We call it image-based sexual abuse. And I can't remember which state it was in, but it was like an individual victim, and she was abused by a partner who had uploaded non-consensually videos of her to the internet. It was like a horrible situation for her, and she had so much damage. But the jury awarded like multiple billions of dollars to this individual who had actually done that because they were just wanted to punish him for what he did to her.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's almost a precedent for what could be possible in these situations with these lawsuits that are outstanding. And I mean, I hope and pray it goes to trial. But at the end of the day, you know, I respect every decision that these survivors make. If they decide that they want to settle, you know, one of the things that's important about civil litigation is that there's something called injunctive relief, where they can actually force changes to happen, where this company, they say you cannot engage in X, Y, and Z practice anymore to help prevent future victimization. But, and then another thing that happened is that, so I told you they were criminally charged, right, for the trafficking of 100 victims in California. They were offered a deferred prosecution agreement. So they don't have to go to trial if they do, they had to pay $1.8 million settlement, and which is nothing to them,
Yeah.
right? And they had to agree to have a government monitor over their site for 3 years, basically like a government babysitter to oversee what they're doing. So we're still hoping for a real full criminal prosecution. I mean, I hope the new administration, maybe they, Pam Bondi, I know that she's really cared about the issue of trafficking, and I wonder if she will administer justice on behalf of, because it's not just 100 women in California. I mean, it's children, countless victims around the world, and so many other victims that are still awaiting that justice to be served. So
Yeah.
we want to see that happen.
Why do you think that Fabian reached out and decided that he wanted to help fight the website that he used to be an owner of?
I wondered that when it happened, and I found out. So he had ulterior motives. So
Shocking.
he was using me, and I was using him, right?
Yeah, as it goes sometimes.
He wanted to buy back the company eventually.
No
so
way.
so he ended up, so I don't know if that was his intention at first. I can't speak to that, but I do know that what ended up being revealed to me was that he told me this himself, is that he was going to try to buy back the company. And this is after they had deleted, most of the site, and they had lost all the credit card companies. So I imagine his idea was like, I made a killing selling it. Now I'm going to go buy it back and then try to resurrect it and make a killing again. That didn't work out in his favor. So he didn't end up being able to buy the website. But I think that was the probably the motivation behind why he was doing that.
I was going to guess that it was he wanted to try to maybe at least shape public perception that he was trying to get on the right side of history. Oh, I didn't necessarily.
He was doing this privately.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, he was doing it behind the scenes.
Well,
so I
sometimes
think,
people do things behind the scenes with the hopes that the curtain will be open. Like, look, I was trying. I didn't recognize it at the time, and now it's they can wash their hands of it. And then reality, they're just trying to get on the right side of history, knowing full well that what they were doing before was horrendous.
Right. Yeah, and I think he had this idea that he said things like, well, the company would be different if I was still in charge, as if like it wouldn't have been the crime scene that it is if he was in charge. But at the same time, I was actually seeing videos, real blatant, clearly assault and rape videos that were uploaded when he was in charge. So, but I tried to kind of, not ruffle feathers and whatnot so that he could help as much as he could.
Ladies and gentlemen, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. I have talked very openly and honestly in my life about times where I relied upon therapy to help me through what I will call the peaks and valleys of my journey. If you think that the idea of talking to somebody might be beneficial, I highly suggest that you check out BetterHelp. It is fully online, which makes therapy affordable and convenient regardless of where you live. They're currently serving over 5 million people worldwide. And it's going to give you access to a diverse network of more than 30,000 credentialed therapists in a wide range of specialties. And what I'll say is this from my own personal experience. If you don't click with the person that you're talking with, don't give up on therapy or counseling. You can give up on that person and find somebody else. Keep going until you find somebody that clicks. That's where the real growth is going to come from. It's easy to switch therapists anytime at no extra cost. BetterHelp has already thought of that for you. You can discover your relationship with green flags, which is the opposite of waiting for the red flags, with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/change, CHANGE, today, and you can get 10% off the first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP, as in papa.com/change. How are your conversations with the whistleblowers? I'm curious with what type of information that they came forward with, and I'm always fascinated when it comes to a whistleblower, and it would be a question for the actual whistleblower, but what was it that got you over that tipping point? Why that one thing, I've
asked them those kinds of questions. I think probably Some of the most helpful, well, they've all been helpful in their own way, and they worked in different areas of the company. Some, senior management levels, sixth floor C-suite, at that level, moderators, those who were involved in the search engine optimization arm of it. But they came forward with such helpful information. I feel like some of those I've spent so much time with that I consider them friends, that we've spent hours together in person, online, on the phone, over years, since this started. And, what they have said, they're each different, right? But, so the moderator, for example, from Cyprus, and he came forward because, he just felt, like a prick in his conscience. He was sexually abused as a child. And this job was particularly hard for him because of what he had to see, considering his own past trauma. And he just felt like it was the right thing to do. And he did it, even though it was dangerous for him because he had signed forms that he didn't really even understand. And he but he wanted to reveal what was really going on behind the scenes, and he presented schedules, internal documents where we have the actual schedules of the moderators, the names and the phone numbers, and the their red words list, for example, where it was the most just like kind of like archaic way that they were not trying to, right? Because if you're really trying, it's not going to look like this.
I was gonna say, if it's
like
archaic,
a couple,
if it's archaic, it was by design, not accident.
right? Yeah, it's like an Excel spreadsheet where they have a few hundred terms that they would say, okay, these are our red words. Where so much CSAM could just easily. And so in the discovery process, this is interesting that just in this judge's decision in December, he revealed that the executives, actually in internal communications that they saw, the executives refused to add certain clearly words to that list that would indicate abuse, like very young girl. They wouldn't add that. There was others that were like clearly indicating a child, and they would not ban those words. They wouldn't add them to the red words list. So they presented like that kind of information, accounting statements. I've got just as far as like how much money they were paying to their hosting company, for example, multiple millions. I think it was like $24 million a year. That they were paying this company, Reflected Networks. I mean, just like all kinds of information. Then they would describe the way that they would do things like moderate, where they would literally say, we're guessing who is 16 and who's 18. We're guessing what's rough sex and rape. We're looking at things like whether they're wearing nail polish to try to determine whether it's a child. I'm like, okay, well, my 5-year-old wears nail polish sometimes. Like, that is not a way that you can figure out who's a child in a video. Like, just crazy information like that they were revealing. And they actually really helped just me understand the business model, the way that they operated, the way that it was all about inventory, that they didn't really care what was in the video. They didn't care if it's 2 minutes, if it's 10 minutes. They didn't care if it's, whatever illegal porn actor that, had a copyright, whatever, like they stole the video and then uploaded it online, or if it was just, this like poor quality thing that was recorded with a camcorder in the 1990s. Like, they don't care. They want inventory. They want videos. They want images. And I think that was some really important insight. So we understand why they're doing what they're doing and why they're not doing, because they don't want friction. They don't want agent consent verification because they don't want friction when people are uploading, because then less people are going to upload, right?
Yeah.
That kind of a thing.
What's next for you in this movement? What do you get your eyes set on?
Yeah, well, so we got to finish this job. I mean, we have to, and the reason why this is so important, to hold Pornhub fully accountable to the full extent of the law, civilly, criminally, from a public perception point of view, that's necessary for healing for victims. To obtain justice is a necessary part of their healing. It says what happened to you matters to us. We're willing to go to the ends of the earth to make sure that those who engaged in this behavior, that destroyed and shattered your life will pay the price for what they did. But also it becomes a deterrent to future abusers. That is a key part of really putting an end to this in a meaningful way. I mean, obviously this is always going to happen, right? This is always, I'm not of the belief that we're going to end human trafficking. We're not going to end sex trafficking or child sexual abuse on the internet, but we can make a huge difference in preventing it in substantial ways. And we have to end impunity for bad actors, for abusers. And that's the only way we're going to deter future abusers, because this is a risk benefit calculation, right? I think you would probably completely understand just the way that works, right? This is a risk benefit calculation, and you just have to make the risk too high. You have to make the benefit too low. You have to make the risk of continued exploitation greater than the benefit they get by maintaining the status quo. And when you do that, that's when the shift happens and when you're going to see them making different decisions, right? And so that's an important part of deterrence. We have to deter by making an example of this company. And we're seeing that in small measures. We are seeing other sites like them who are looking at what's happening to Pornhub and going, okay, we don't want to end up in that situation. Let's proactively try to clean up our site. Let's try to change our upload process. Let's do the things we have to do so that we don't become the next Pornhub. And that's a really good outcome of this fight. So we want to see age and consent verification policies put in place to help stop this and make the internet a safer place. And what that looks like is that Visa says, just like we have anti-money laundering policy, we have anti-online sexual crime policy, and we don't do business with any user-generated porn site that doesn't verify the age and consent of those who are in the videos that are distributed. And
I don't even feel like that's a heavy lift. That's not a huge ask.
It's not, except for the fact it upends their business model. Because it puts friction in place. That's why they're so resistant to it. So at the end of the day, we're going to have a different business model. The free user-generated porn business model that is inherently a situation that enables sexual crime to proliferate will have to be upended and reinvented, right? They're going to have to do something different in order to be able to survive. So, but it's the most common sense thing you could ever think of, right? Like, obviously there should be age and consent verification, but there's so much resistance because it's expensive. So it costs money to do that, right? And it costs uploads, right? It costs traffic. But sorry, too bad. Like that has to happen. Because,
without that, at what cost? If you don't have those things, what is the cost of your business model? Not from a monetary perspective, but from a humanitarian perspective.
Right. Yes, of course. Yes. And when you think about like monetary versus human costs, it's like you can spend money to reduce the human cost of shattered lives that are a result of, the current business model. So that's what's next, is just, we really want to create kind of a safer internet and specifically focused on these user-generated free porn sites, and kind of seeing a transformation of that industry to become safe.
How can people support you?
Well, today still people are signing the Trafficking Hub petition, and we're going to keep going. The mission of that petition and this movement is to shut down Pornhub and hold its executives accountable. And we're 91% of the way there. And right now, we've got our collective foot on the neck of this behemoth of abuse, and we're not going to stop until, justice is fully served. So you can add your voice to this movement by signing the petition. You can join Team Takedown, which is a dedicated team of activists that not only want to take down Pornhub and take down abuse across the internet, we want to make the internet a safer place. And you can get the book, Takedown. This is the story that I was just describing. And 100% of all proceeds from the royalty proceeds from this book go to the Justice Defense Fund to support the cause. And that's another really helpful way to also get yourself fully immersed in understanding the story. It's written like a true crime thriller, so you'll be it'll be engaging for you. It'll be horrifying as well. But at the end of it, you like the feedback I'm getting is that people just become passionate about wanting to put an end to these horrendous crimes. So,
any final thoughts you want to leave people with?
I'm grateful for you and for having this hard conversation and having lots of hard conversations on your podcast, because a lot of times people don't want to talk about this because it's so dark and it's so heavy and it's uncomfortable even to talk. Like, a lot of people don't want to talk about porn because these are parts of our lives that we don't want to have public conversations about or hear about or think about. But the only way that we're going to actually put a dent in all of this is to have that public pressure, and that comes from public awareness. And so I'm just so grateful for you for wanting to have this conversation. So thank you for what you do and for just being an advocate for justice to be served for criminals of all sorts.
I'll be honest. I mean, these are the only type of conversations I want to have. You could have a conversation about the sunset and unicorns and gumdrops falling from the sky, and it's not going to change anything for anybody. I'd rather get the old flashlight out and be like, what is in that closet in the deepest, darkest recess? It's not mean it's going to be fun. Yes, it doesn't mean it's going to be fun and that it's going to be enjoyable to deal with. But I think that's where actual progress and change comes from.
Yeah, well, thanks. We're birds of a feather then.
Yeah, for sure.
Would want to do that. So yeah, thank you.
Hope you enjoyed today's episode. It's actually an interesting way to put that. I don't know if it's an enjoyable topic. I hope that you found today's episode to be thought-provoking. Hope it makes you take a breath, take a step back, and think. If you are interested in supporting Laila's book or her effort, you can find her book, Takedown, Inside the Fight to Shut Down Pornhub for Child Abuse, Rape, and Sex Trafficking, or you could follow her hashtag TraffeckingHub on social media platforms. Thanks again for listening to Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Firecracker Farm. We'll be back next week with an all-new episode and an all-new guest. I'll see you guys then. Good morning, everybody. As you know, Change Agents is an Ironclad original, but what you may not know is that for over a decade, Ironclad has worked with brands and individuals to create world-class films, series, podcasts, and ad campaigns. In fact, I've been working with Ironclad for the past few years. I was introduced to them on a project through the Navy SEAL Foundation. I've worked with them on a variety of projects, even up here in Montana, long before they proposed the idea of Change Agents to me. They're the best in their field. And I say that because there are plenty of people out there looking for the best, looking for the cream of the crop, looking for the top of the triangle. And if you're looking for that, you need to look no further than Ironclad. If you ever need media by way of film, a series, podcasts, or ad campaigns, they have you covered.